Hello and welcome to Adventures in AI, where the Insight Flow team members share things that have caught our attention over the past week and talk about our own experiences in the world of AI. If you want to get in touch with us about this or any other podcast, please email aiai@insightflow.io or find us on LinkedIn at insightflow-io or Twitter at insightflow1. I'm Giles.
I'm Rich.
And I'm Graham. And today we're going to talk about something that I think is actually relatively much more a common conversation than not. And this is this question about whether AI is just one of these tech fads or whether it really genuinely is as game-changing as lots of people are saying. I think it's interesting. I mean, we're slightly growing immune to the next technology fad. And there have been lots of them, and we'll talk about what makes it a fad and what makes it a real thing over the next few minutes. But I think that there is definitely the mood music around AI that suggests that it is rather more profound. And I think we've mentioned in podcasts before now, there's somebody, probably Bill Gates, or somebody else who suggested that the impact of AI is going to be the equivalent to the impact of electricity coming into homes and businesses over the next 10 or 15 years. And the reason why it's important to talk about this is actually because the thing that we always talk about, that it is something that we passionately believe that businesses need to get ready for, and that humans probably need to get ready for. But in our context, businesses getting ready for it is fairly significant. So, yeah, I think it goes without saying that the Adventures in AI team probably all collectively believe that it is not a fad. But given that we're spending as much effort and time working on AI as we are, that we would say that, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I certainly agree that it's actually a foundational technology, and I would compare it quite closely to the internet, and the reason being, it's a foundational technology that you can build upon and do lots of other niche things. And so, for example, if you look at kind of what fads there's been in the past. So one example is like 3D TVs. I'm guilty of having bought a 3D TV like about a decade ago, using it about 3 times and then never using it again. But if you were to think about what's AI in that picture, I'd actually more likely describe AI as the invention of the TV in general. And the kind of on top of that, there's lots of industries that can form on the back of it, just like how the broadcast industry has evolved since the TV's been invented. And I think a really telling kind of anecdotal evidence of it not being a fad is every single person that I know that I've introduced to AI now uses it regularly. It's not like oh, that's cool and then forget about it. It's actually they're using it almost quite often on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's actually a very smart and calculated decision by a lot of the AI models to come out with free tiers that people can use in their personal lives on a daily basis, because really once you've gone and used it, you don't want to go back, and that kind of filters through into the business world in terms of, especially a lot of what we're seeing now is how can AI help businesses.
I pull out of that just 2 things. The things that we need to look at, I think, are longevity and impact. And if it is going to have a remarkably long life, and if it is going to have a remarkably big impact, then I think it's safe to say it's not a fad.
Yeah, I think I would probably characterize it slightly differently to the way Rich has, in the sense that I think it's more like the invention of the computer chip. And the reason I say that is because essentially what generative AI specifically is, so the GPTs, the transformers and stuff that sit underneath it, are the closest we've ever got to something that represents or is a mechanical version of the way the human brain works. And if you think of computers in their original kind of silicon-based guise, they were an attempt to mechanical Turk, or no, not without the Turk bit, but sort of create a mechanical version of the human brain. And one of the problems we've always had is that actually the way that that particular mechanical version of the human brain works is fundamentally different to the way the human brain works, which is why you need programmers to translate between the way human brains work and the way machines work. And so, to my mind, what AI and generative AI specifically is doing is actually bridging that gap finally, because it thinks in the same way that humans do, and therefore someone recently said, the universal programming language has suddenly become English, rather than all of the myriad of different languages that we already have. So I think that in itself is fundamental. So it's kind of it ushers in a completely new era in the way that you can do things with computers, first of all. Second of all, I think it augments human intelligence, or will do if it doesn't already. My current view is that it augments the intelligence of a significant proportion of society if they use it. So it probably doesn't yet perform beyond the level of the top physicists, scientists, people who are kind of right at the peak of their field. But it certainly does operate, above the average quite significantly in many cases. So I think on both of those two counts, actually, AI has so that's almost just talking about what potential does it have to create a major transformation in the way that we do things. And then the second part is, will people use it? And as Rich said, I think pretty much everyone that I know who's tried it continue to use it on a regular basis, and it's that sort of ground up adoption which makes the biggest difference in my view.
Yeah, I think that bottom up, ground up factor of it is incredibly significant. And if you think back to, we've all lived through, two of us at least have lived through the earliest part of digital onwards, and there was, with that, there were always the people who enjoyed the process of creating a screen that said "Hello World." But there's quite a big gap between those people playing and finding the joy of HTML and really practical everyday and business solutions, until dynamic websites came about and databases were driving websites, and you suddenly started to get a sense of the potential of what it was going to be. But those, of course, required quite heavy investment in time and technology from the top. And Rich, you've just said it, this idea that people are using AI, are inventing ways to use AI, but are continuing to do it and continuing to find real value in it. I think primarily in work sense at the moment. I don't think at the moment the idea of second brain has grown as fast as it may do in the near future. But I also think that there's this really interesting thing. You just look at the statistics, and what was it? OpenAI went from nothing to 100 million users in something like 4 months. You probably correct me on that, which is just ridiculous. And the fact that the stats suggest that continuing use is continuing to grow would suggest this idea that people are using it. And if people are using it on those types of scales, then it's profoundly different, really, from just about any one of these other technology fads that you might want to talk about.
So I think one of the other things you can look at when you're assessing, if something's going to be used particularly longer term, is look at what's happening in schools and universities. So are the kids using it? And the very fact that, there's now someone, in many schools who has some level of responsibility for how the school deals with AI, And the fact that, obviously they're kind of going, oh, well, hang on a second. So if the kids are going to use AI to write all their essays, how are they going to do in exams? And if we see a massive drop off in success in exams, then we know the kids have been using AI too much to do their essays and not doing enough themselves. So I think, but I think that adoption by kids in school or anyone in full-time education, that as they come into the workplace and they're used to using these tools and are kind of adept at using them and getting the best out of them for their own personal benefit, then you'll have the same thing that you had with the internet when it first came along, where people were going, well, hang on, I had access to the internet at university, and now you're saying I haven't even got email at work. I can only use, it's just my own memory of, my first job. And I went in, it's a stuffy old insurance company, and they didn't have external email. And it was just kind of coming in, and the internal email was like green screen, horrible. And I was there going, what is this place? Why am I here? But, obviously within a year of me being there, they realized the error of their ways and got proper email. So I think that'll be very telling in the way that, it gets adopted through organizations.
I think another really telling kind of point for actually AI's around to stick around is it's actually follow the money, and lots of money is being invested in AI across lots of different companies and different areas, and like companies, they don't always get it right. So for example, I think Facebook or Meta backtracked a little bit on their kind of the whole VR side of things. But when you get to a point where so many different companies are investing a hell of a lot of money in, I think it's actually more like nowadays. It reminds me of the green energy, the push into green energy, like I say, a decade ago, investment in that space. And as we all know, kind of green energy is here to stay. And I think AI is going to do the same. And I think, Graham, actually, you undersold just how, with your statistic of how fast kind of ChatGPT has got a user base. I think it's grown its user base the faster than anything ever in existence, kind of almost by an order of magnitude. As well, just to kind of ram the point home that actually people are using this, and people are using it regularly, and it's growing.
I think what's really interesting about that for me is, so OpenAI, or specifically ChatGPT, is not a viral product. So unlike, the things that were fastest before that were all social media, where they're driven by a natural virality in that you're always asked to invite your friends to it. ChatGPT didn't have any of that. So it was all entirely driven by word of mouth and the news. So to have grown that quickly, I mean, it has kind of not topped out, but it's not growing any, it hasn't reached billions 18 months later. It's still on, I think, 150 to 200 million. So there's obviously a specific group of people for whom it's interesting rather. But I think, it says a lot about how either there was a natural market for it already and it was able to tap in really, really quickly, or there's something fundamentally different about it. I mean, obviously, the fact that it can write love poems for you is very important.
In French, no less, which I have actually tried. But
yeah, you can write them in Python as well if you really want it to.
Yeah, no. I think the final thing that's worth talking. I think the final thing that's worth talking about in this section, and again, it is a thing that people talk about with these new technologies, but the impact that it's going to have. And we've talked in a previous podcast about Goldman Sachs suggesting that 2/3 of all jobs operate in a way that could be aided or replaced by AI. The fact that we through these podcasts have looked at a whole lot of different functions and sort of suggested that AI will, at the very minimum, be a really profound supporting tool for a whole lot of different functions. And I think that this idea of AI impacting, being embedded in businesses across the scope of their operations is very, very important. So, we've talked about this idea of individuals using it to write French love poetry or even Python love poetry. And we've talked about the school kids using it to write essays or to write their work, and probably in more sophisticated ways than that. But I think that this idea that says, look, AI can quite plausibly be involved in the whole of the business is really interesting. It's a really interesting viewpoint. It's not a new viewpoint. I mean, it's, as I say, there were people in '95 talking about digital being involved across the business, and there were equally strong voices at the time saying that it wasn't going to happen. And I think that 20 years later, you look up and say the majority of businesses use digital at quite a lot larger degree than they probably envisaged that they would 20 years ago. And I think that the voices saying that something similar will happen with AI are actually far more plausible.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons you can take from history in that particular example is how long it actually takes. So you will get some AI powered, like completely AI powered businesses, I would say, in the next 5 years, and possibly sooner than that. But I think it'll take 20 for AI to majorly disrupt everything. And there's a couple of reasons for that, because actually, if you think about a lot of businesses, they've optimized themselves to do things in a certain way. So every business is essentially an optimized way of delivering the thing that they offer as a product to the customer and of selling it effectively. And swapping out humans for AI, particularly with AI as it is at the moment, where realistically in most cases, in order to get an AI to work effectively, you have to kind of customize it to get it to work well. So whether that's customized prompts or customized knowledge base, or an actual chain of AIs that are working together one after the other, and therefore have potentially quite large sphere for errors and things like that. So all of those things together mean that you can't kind of just go, okay, I'm going to give the whole problem to an AI to reliably continue to deliver what you delivered with humans before. Now, I'm not saying that actually in many cases humans aren't particularly reliable either, but the whole point is the systems and things are in place in those organizations to handle the areas where humans aren't fully reliable. So they've already got the fail-safes in place for that. Whereas for AI, that's right at the beginning. So I think actually, if I'm saying a sort of 20-year time horizon, it's actually ironing out all of those kind of kinks. But that does, of course, make a big assumption that in the next 5 years, as Sam Altman says, that we haven't got AGI, in which case you just chuck everything at the AI and it'll do it all for you and it'll figure it out. In which case, and at that point you could go to an AGI and say, right, build me a business that will deliver X, which might be a revenue target, or it might be a kind of solve me a problem, and it'll go off and figure out how to do it and then give you the money.
Yeah, I agree that it's actually, I think, the architecture that's the biggest barrier for business operations. And I think we'll get there for businesses before waiting for, say, ChatGPT 10 that's an AGI. Actually, I think there'll be kind of third-party architecture that's built that can use the AI that we have at the moment. Because I even think the AI that we have at the moment, if we think about how intelligent it is, I think it's pretty intelligent enough as long as you poke it in the right ways and feed it the right data. And I agree that those are the hard bits at the moment for businesses.
Well, I kind of think it's, if you imagine a baby, and the process that you have to go through is kind of educating it. And although you can do this much faster than you can with a child, so you might be able to go through the same process that you go through with a baby in a day rather than 20 years potentially. But the point is, the base intelligence, which is what you're talking about, is there from the kind of massive scale of training of the model. And actually, it already does have a load of knowledge, but that knowledge isn't always useful. So it's a bit like either training a child to play football or training an intern to be useful in your organization. And we've used the example of interns lots of times. And in both cases, you have to they have to understand the rules that they're playing by, and they have to understand some basic bits of information that are very contextual. And in both of those cases, you have to therefore have an architecture that sits around it that says, okay, here are the things you need to remember. Here's the current kind of context and conversation that's being had, or in the case of football, here's where all the other players are on the pitch, etc. And it's those things together which you can think of as like the overall architecture of a human brain, as opposed to just the intelligence part of it, that are the bits that need to be built to actually create systems that work really well. But actually, there's a level above that, because in most cases in businesses, it's not just one person doing everything. It's a bunch of people with different skill set and architecture, and then create lots of them that have different things, different abilities, and allow them to talk to each other and work together. And so I think that architecture will take a while to perfect. And, you can see there are already quite a lot of sort of initiatives, both within organizations like OpenAI and kind of in the startup community and a bunch of different places where that is already happening. But it's, I think to get that really robust, it'll take a while.
It's probably worth, because you've sort of both touched on aspects of AI as they are or as they could be that make it likely to have a bigger impact. It's probably worth just looking at going through, what is it about AI that leads us to be quite so sure that it's going to have such a big impact. I think, for me, I think one of the first ones that you would look at is its learning process, and you've both kind of touched on this. This idea that AI can learn independently and can continuously improve. So this idea of taking the AI from being a baby to an intern to a valued employee is, I think, a really great example of that. That it grows and gets better and what have you. And we can see already that AI is doing this in fraud detection, where it's continually watching for new tricks and new frauds and adapting to those and recognizing those quicker. And I'm sure that there's already a large number of different areas you could point to. I'm pretty sure that virus and counter-virus activity in AI is a hidden arms race as we speak, where you've got AIs creating viruses and AIs protecting against viruses, and very much learning and aggressively improving, respectively, on the respective sides of it. So for me, this idea of machine learning, of learning and continual improvement, is a really fundamental difference between AI and other types of technology that we have talked about that might otherwise have been seen as fads.
I think we talk quite a lot about AI being able to learn and how powerful that is. And it's maybe worth me explaining how it can learn, because there are lots of different ways that it can learn. So the obvious main one is AIs are trained on large data sets of kind of usually text. So, for example, things that have been scraped off the internet, archive.org, all those kind of things. So there can be billions of different parameters that are put together that the model's trained on, and that's kind of your base knowledge of how it's trained. And then on top of that, you've got something called fine tuning or parameter efficient tuning. And this is making tweaks to that trained model. And the best way to think of it is, if you think of a trained model as a large toolbox, when you're fine tuning it, you're maybe putting some specific tools in that first drawer. So maybe you need like a Torx screwdriver, something that's not used quite so often, but you've still got all your hammers and your spanners and things in the rest of the toolbox, but you've got something that's specific to you, and you can keep fine-tuning it. So you can keep, like, maybe next time replace the next drawer with a different set of tools that you know that you need to use regularly. And you've also got learning. I think I'd class RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, as learning as well, because effectively what that's doing is you're saying each time it's answering a question for you, you're feeding it with relevant information. Now, obviously, as that information and knowledge base grows that you can feed it, I think you can also then class the AI as kind of learning based on what you're feeding it. And the final one, which I think is quite a cool implementation of training that you don't see quite as often, it's something called it's just simply called datasets. But actually, what's happening here is you let your users interact with the AI model. And then once you've got a batch of them, you can go through them and see what the questions were, see what the answers were, and then decide, okay, was that a good one, or do I want to tweak it so that if the same questions asked again or similar questions asked again, the AI model can give an answer more in line with what I'd like it to. And just the same way that you can insert RAG into a context window, you can insert these data sets of like, this is how you should answer questions on this topic. You can insert that into the context as well. And the really cool thing about data sets is a human can go through it, or an AI can go through it and grade its own answers, or you can use a different AI to grade them as well. So that's how you really get this idea of kind of this self-iteration of how an AI model can learn and actually start to train itself.
Yeah, I think, and there's some that's a great summary, by the way, of the different levels. I think, one of the things that is easy to forget is one of the reasons why something like ChatGPT is so powerful is because it's been trained on billions of parameters. So I can't remember what they're up to now, but so it's massive. I mean, they should really be called MLMs because they're massive learning models, not large not large language models rather. But it is amazing what you can do with relatively small amounts of context in the context window. And I kind of think of it like short-term and long-term memory. So the model intuitively understands stuff in the same way that if someone said, what's a, picture a bird. I know this might be tricky for you, Rich. If someone says picture a bird, then most of us will go, okay, yeah, I know what you mean. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to reason about it. I just know it kind of comes from the back of my brain somewhere, and I know what it is. Whereas if you said, picture the first paragraph of the SOC 2 specification, you'd probably go, I might need to go and read that first. And so the context window is the equivalent of the ones where you actually don't know the answer but can apply reasoning to any information that you're given that enables you to find the answer. And one of the interesting things that we will probably learn more about, and I know we've touched on this in the pod in the past, is differently trained models will think effectively or reason in different ways. And so given the same prompt and the same context, two models won't necessarily come out with the right answer. In fact, they almost certainly won't. Sorry, same answer, not right answer. So, it doesn't, the point is, if you ask two humans with different experiences the same question with the same source information, it's kind of like a classic exam. You wouldn't expect them to give you the same answer. And so I think one of the things that we might start to see in future is a diversification of models rather than a unification. And I think that will actually, so you might end up with an insurance specialist AI and a banking, like a retail banking specialist AI, and then within those you might get further specialization for specific organizations. which go beyond just what you can do with retrieval augmented generation by giving it different context, but it's actually more fundamental to the training of the model itself, because particularly in something like financial services where it's heavily regulated, you actually have to start thinking about making sure it doesn't hallucinate in ways that could be damaging. Again, I think this is a different use case, or quite a different use case, and therefore a different set of technologies to what you would have with something like fraud detection, which tends to be a more straightforward kind of AI. And actually the learning that a fraud detection does is generally more data, gives me better statistics. Whereas large language models, they have a natural intelligence, if you like, that's beyond an algorithm.
Yeah, I can definitely see it going down these kind of more niche avenues, like you said, insurance. And actually, I think we're seeing, or about to see, the very first one that I've seen. Certainly, it's LexisNexis are introducing their own AI model, which is exactly as you said. It's trained at a more fundamental level of okay, what's actually useful for lawyers. So I think it's called Nexus Plus, and so just if anyone's wondering why I can't picture a bird, I very recently found out, probably about a couple of years ago, that I have something called aphantasia, which means that I can't picture images in my head, and it blew my mind. Probably about 2 years ago, that other people can see things in their head and I can't. It was like a massive revelation for me.
Which, for me, that's all part of the rich tapestry of humanity. And it's great, the fact that we think differently, because, if we all thought the same, then we probably wouldn't be as progressed as we are, as humans on this earth.
Yeah.
Might have some
and also why I'm
well.
rubbish at art.
But I think, just bringing it back onto the topic of why we believe that AI is going to have an impact, this adaptability of the core models, this idea that says that, like humans, AIs will rapidly become skilled in niche areas and are already becoming skilled in niche areas. It feels to me a really profound part of that mix about why do we think AI is going to have an enormous impact? Because it's going to be really, really good at hundreds, thousands, if not millions of different types of task. And we can already see that starting to happen. And I think that if you look again at the sort of the technologies that might have come up on that list, none of them do that. None of them have that ability to morph according to need in the way that AI does.
No, I think that's definitely true. I think also it's worth there's a nuance here, or the slight separation between the fundamental technology that is behind the large language models. So the general purpose transformer technology, which is what is used, that's how the models are trained. And essentially what we've been doing, or what OpenAI and a bunch of other companies have been doing for the last 5 years, is just scaling it. So just going, all right, if I throw more parameters, if I create a model that has more parameters, what impact is that going to have on how good it is? Now I've seen, I think it's Jan LeCun has been saying that he thinks we've kind of reached the limits of where the GPTs will actually start to add or become more and more intelligent. He thinks actually we've probably already hit the peak of that. But he did say that adding other technologies, so there are a whole bunch of other potential AI algorithms, models, ways of doing things, etc., that if you start combining them together in much the same way that the brain doesn't just have one part that does one thing, it has multiple parts that do multiple things, that it'll be the combination of those different algorithms, if you like, that will actually help to create something that goes well beyond what AI is even able to do today.
But it's also easy, and this is something, again, you've talked about or implicitly talked about. It's easy to forget that the other feature of AI, or another feature of AI that leads to its impact is just its sheer capabilities of data analysis. And this is implicit in both things the things you've both been talking about. But this ability to process massive data sets, to extract insights, is already providing massive impact. I mean, I was reading the other day about an AI looking at radiograms and X-rays, looking particularly for breast cancer, and being able to spot in the tiny details things that humans just can't see. And this idea that says that it's got the ability to do that because of this ability to process and retain millions of different examples. And I think in the case that I was reading, it identified, and it was a relatively small sample, but it identified a sample of women whose mammograms had been given the all clear, but actually the AIs were looking at them again and saying, well, hang on a moment, this one isn't. And it was something, like 10 or 15 times better at identifying false negatives than it was actually creating false positives. So, and therefore that there is, the whole host of women now going into treatment that would not have happened had the AIs not looked at it, and the AIs would not have been able to do it without this ability to process huge amounts of data in ways that humans just can't even think about.
So when you're told to go to a doctor instead of Googling your symptoms, I think what you're saying is we'll probably get to a point where you want to just ask the computer first.
Just go Google your symptoms. Or send. But I think what's interesting about that, particularly if you look at that in the context of specialization, so because there are two parts to, so it's the ability for it to understand, learn quickly, I think, is kind of the subtext of what you're saying, if I've understood you correctly. So it's the fact that it can process masses of examples of something, distill it down to essentially a set of statistical probabilities, which is essentially what happens inside there, and probably in the human brain as well. But I don't know for certain if that's how it works. But then when you take that ability and the ability to answer lots and lots of parallel questions at the same time, which again a human can't, it's so the thing that's most interesting, if I've got one radiographer in a hospital, then that person can only look at so many mammograms and other things through the course of their working day. Whereas an AI, you can have thousands, hundreds, depending on just how much compute resource you've got available to you, you can have thousands, hundreds of thousands to that AI. So that's one specialist AI in one discipline, but the scale is potentially exponential. And you can kind of see from that why people get slightly scared by AI, because actually it's coming for our jobs, sort of thing. I think interestingly, I saw something over the weekend where someone was saying that probably the first job to be disrupted by AI most heavily will be programming, because the people that are creating the AIs understand programming because they're programmers, and so they're most likely to be able to automate the bits of their job that they hate. But at the same time, that I saw the counter argument is actually, in something like programming, there's a lot of uncertainty in solving any given problem, and I think this is true in most different professions, which is why so the reason we've always said it's an assistant rather than the worker. And it's great for things like mentoring, great for supporting people, great for for acting kind of like an intern, I suppose. But I think the reason we tend to say that is because actually there's usually a lot of human complexity in jobs that you can't give a simple instruction to. So something very specific, like here's a picture, tell me if it's this or that, is really defined, simple, straight, in many respects, a straightforward task because it has a binary outcome. So it's a yes or no. And those kind of tasks are ones that AI can do really well at the moment. Anything that's more complicated than that, which is, and I'm trying to think of an example of, so, if you took the full history of the patient and then gave the mammogram and said, and asked it, is this the mammogram for this person? Right. So, and the full history of the patient included the fact that they were male, then would the AI pick that up and be able to answer the question if it had been trained on the mammograms? Answer, probably not. So I think that's where you come up against some of the limitations of it and some of the places where the architecture as it is at the moment won't lend itself to some of the things where a human goes, well, hang on a second, that doesn't, there's something wrong here. And sometimes we do it intuitively without, and kind of, you get that feeling in your gut where you go, I don't know why, but I'm uncomfortable about this. So I think building that into the architecture where the model goes, I'm uncomfortable. I can't tell you why, but I'm uncomfortable. So I'm going to say, I can't answer this.
I think it's interesting, actually. I think that more holistic view of information that you've described there about a patient, I think it actually means these holistic views actually, they're redefining what we would, I guess, typically consider as data sets, because the AI can analyze lots of different things at scale. And if you're listening and maybe thinking, I don't work with data sets at all, I guarantee you've got tons of data sets. You've got your My Documents folder on your PC, for example. That's a huge data set on the work that you do, and your style and tone, how you write. That's all information that can be very quickly processed by AI. Your email inbox, your calendar, your images, the articles you read, the magazines you subscribe to. And I think if we're thinking about how AI redefines what we think of as a useful data set, if you think of a research paper, for example, quite often a research paper is based on a data set. But actually now that research paper can be a data set in itself, along with all the other research papers, because an AI can go and scan the text and learn based on what's been written on the data set. So it's almost like you can start to go up a kind of a hierarchy of information in terms of what you're analyzing and what you're doing with information.
I think what's really important out of all of the things you were saying is that this impact idea is you are describing how to interact with an AI in very similar ways to how you interact with humans. And it's back to one of the early points, that the idea that AI will have a massive impact is because we talk to it and we start to interact with it in ways that we already intrinsically recognize. Our conversations with our peers, with our co-workers, with our family, with our friends, and what have you. And I think that for me, that becomes one of the really driving things. And it underwrites an awful lot of the things we've talked about. And this idea that people are starting to use it independent of being asked to by their organizations. This idea that says that we can start to make or AI starts to feel like human interactions as opposed to technology interactions, is incredibly powerful. And part of what that drive is the thing that gives its impact. I think there's the sort of another area that's worth talking about quickly about why AI is going to have such a vast impact is this idea around decision making. And I think that it's sort of one of those areas where there's probably the most fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I suspect that if you're to get people to describe the dystopian AI future that some are predicting, it is almost all around decision making. It's almost all around the AIs then starting to act on their ability to learn, their ability to understand data. And the dystopian bit is where they start to act in ways that in the dystopian future are not good for humans. In the utopian future, absolutely good for humans. And I think that this
and actually, interestingly, sorry, it's in some cases good for some humans and bad for others. Actually, which is probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah, and the decision making stuff is an inevitable consequence, I think, of it being able to learn, it being able to understand and analyze huge amounts of data, and the decision making impact stuff, I think, is the bit that becomes truly transformational. Now, we have to be very careful that we don't allow it to go into dystopian futures. And the dystopian future stuff, some of it is perfectly plausible. The idea of AI talking to AI, or the AIs gaming each other at the expense of humans, is plausible. I mean, we can't deny that it's plausible, and we can't deny that were that to happen, it would have a massive impact. But I think decision making is a really interesting part of AI's capabilities, and again, something very different, and a very different whole category of capability to any other types of technology that may have been talked about in the past, and that we can, in hindsight, see as a fad.
Decision making is a really interesting one, because and you're totally right about the kind of being this fear, uncertainty, and doubt around it. And I think, to illustrate it, if you ask somebody, would you rather get a team of consultants in to help you with a business problem or ask an AI? I think inherently people would start to go, oh, the business consultants, they probably have experience in what they're doing, and so I'll go with them. But if I was to rephrase that question as to, would you rather have business consultants come in, or would you rather have the last 30 years of human knowledge that's out in the public ever, almost, you might start to think, oh, actually, I quite like the sound of that larger data set that probably has a lot more different points of view and experience in it.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when people say that AI or generative AI can't reason, because actually my experience of using it is that it's actually very good at reasoning, and in many cases, as good, if not better, than most people I know. And it's because of the data set that it's drawing on. Now, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily as creative at reasoning as humans can be sometimes. But then actually in a lot of cases, humans aren't that great at creative reasoning either. So, if you look at it from a kind of average perspective, it's probably on average significantly better, but not as brilliant as the best. And I think that's one of the main objections I see actually a lot of the time, is people going, well, but if I got the top team, then they would outperform AI. And to which my response would be, well, how often do you get the top team? It's so unless you are in the very fortunate position of having the absolute best in their spheres, then you will really find that in many cases AI will be as good.
But this is an area of impact, and this may be the sort of second stage of the AI revolution, that where we start to routinely let AIs make decisions for us. And I think it all leads into the sort of area that it's worth talking about in terms of the impact of AI is the impact it will have, or the impact that human AI partnerships will have. If we get comfortable with allowing AIs to make decisions for us, the first area that's likely to happen is in the prosaic, mundane, boring stuff. And I think that is true about quite a lot of AI activities. One of the things that is almost certain to happen is that the AI will take away the boring, the mundane, the repetitive tasks, analysis, thinking, decision making, and for that reason alone, in the human AI partnership, they're going to be welcomed in. They're going to allow humans to free up more time to do the stuff that is not boring, mundane, and repetitive. And I think that, if we're thinking about why we believe that AI has a bigger impact than anything else, this idea that it's taking on stuff that people really don't like would, for me, to be a really good indicator that it will have an impact, and it will have a massive impact.
In terms of the boring, repetitive stuff that people don't tend to like, I think that's the vast majority of what we do as well. And I've certainly found the most productive people in an organisation are the ones that can get the boring stuff done. I think everybody loves to kind of think creatively and be able to push their knowledge and explore things, and they can approach that with real gusto. But I think a lot of people do struggle with relying on those boring things, and it's the people in an organization that you can rely on to get that form across or send that email. They're actually really, really valuable, and the people that you turn to a lot.
Yeah, no, I think that's where I think it'll have a massive impact on raising the bar across the board in terms of how effective organizations are. And I think that's across public, private sector. It's across even within kind of family units and things. If things can just get done because the AI will do it for you, then it frees up a lot of time for other things, whether that's leisure time in the kind of personal context, or it might be in a business actually going beyond focusing on the basics. And I think a particular observation I would make is lots of organizations that I've worked with and in have, like you say, been very focused on the stuff that isn't just doing the basics for their customers. And the more that you can get at least something in place that does that, the better those organizations will do. And everyone will be happier because the customers will be going, okay, I know if I've got a problem, it'll get dealt with, as opposed to, and I won't end up having to wait an hour on the phone, and I won't end up having to, try 15 different people to actually get the answer I want. It'll just get dealt with. So I think that will have a massive impact.
And the other area of those types of things that we've talked about this a lot on Adventures in AI, is the collaboration with humans that is the mentor relationship. So there's you can start to define all the different relationships that humans will have with AI, from master-servant, where humans are the masters, to collaborative partners in planning, decision-making, and so forth. But also mentee-mentor. And again, we've talked about it a lot, but I think that the capability of AI to have very personalized discussions and conversations with individuals that help them in whatever context, whether it's an educational context or a work context or a therapy context or what have you. And I think that idea that humans will actually end up having quite personal, quite in-depth, and quite important relationships with various implementations of AI is something that's very profound, and that impact alone, I think, will be quite transformative of the world.
How long will it be before someone marries an AI?
Or identifies as an AI.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
I think actually that the more I think about kind of this coaching and mentor relationship of getting an AI to help you, I think fundamentally humans are helping you. And this goes back to my point earlier about actually AI is the last X amount of years of public human knowledge. And all those humans are around to help you. All AI is doing is finding them and stitching it together for you.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it, actually, because it's a proxy. I mean, you then get into the sort of the legal debates as to whether training an AI using the sum of human knowledge is copyright theft or a valid way of using publicly available material and not copying it. Not a subject for this particular episode, though. So I have a question then. Well, just one quick question. So what is it that would stop AI from becoming, as big as we think it will?
For me, the biggest barriers is like something Graham you mentioned earlier. It's like this fear and uncertainty of doubt of being able to trust AI enough to fundamentally change your business. But I think that's a hump people will get over eventually. But I can certainly see it being a barrier to some extent. And the other main one, which I think will be solved again, is what we talked about at the very start of this podcast, this idea of actually a lot of the intelligence comes from the architecture and the data sets and the information you feed it. And I think those for businesses will be a lot more difficult, because quite often you would want to build a very kind of specific bespoke iteration of AI that works purely for you. And with data sets, you've got to keep on top of them, keep on making sure they're up to date. And I think those are the only, for me, real sticking points. But I think they are problems that people will solve over time.
So I believe that it's largely unstoppable. The genie's out of the bottle. That stuff will happen, and that the impacts will happen, and whether they happen in 5 years, 10 years, or 50 years, the impact will happen. Perhaps the only thing that might slow it down or disrupt it altogether is the idea that humans stop being creative. Humans stop generating new ideas that can feed the learning and can feed the AI's data sets. And that at some point, everything's a kind of closed loop of AI generating stuff and then using other AIs using that to generate new stuff. And you get the kind of idea of a closed loop of knowledge and insight and creativity that never grows, and at which point people will break out of that cycle and go in their own directions. But that's fairly speculative.
Interesting, though, because I think there's a risk of that. But I think as long as humans continue to interact in some way with that, then it's not a completely closed loop. So interesting, though. Well, so we've had a very good look through both, what AI is, why we think it isn't a fad, what we think the power of AI is beyond kind of simple automation, how it can help with things like decision making, how it can process large data sets, and also a little bit about the human AI partnership. Our resounding conclusion, as you might expect, is that AI is here to stay. So it's not a fad from a technical perspective. It's something that will fundamentally change business in particular, but probably society more broadly. And I guess if I were to summarize the ways we think, or the reason we think that, is because the level and speed of adoption of it by people in lots of different walks of life suggests that there's a real need for what it can do now. And as it improves and grows and gets better, then that need will most likely become stronger. As well as the fact that there's loads of money being pushed behind it, which always helps. So that was a quick look at AI and why we think it's here to stay. That's it for this time. I've been Giles.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Rich.